The forgotten child night had fallen quietly over the human-alien border town. The streets were almost empty, lit only by broken street lamps and the soft hum of cleaning drones. Elias walked slowly, pushing his old cleaning cart along the muddy road. He was a janitor, known by everyone but noticed by no one. Years of loss had made his eyes tired, but his heart was still gentle. As he swept near the riverbank, something unusual caught his attention. The water shimmered under the dim lights, and a strange, floating pod drifted toward the edge. It wasn't like any cargo or waste container. It was smooth, silver, and glowing faintly from within. Elias frowned and stepped closer, his boots sinking into wet soil. Inside the pod, a small figure moved weakly. His heart skipped a beat. He forced the pod open, and what he saw left him speechless. It was a baby alien girl, no more than a few months old. Her limbs were twisted, her ears folded down, and her breathing shallow. She looked fragile, almost broken, but her wide eyes stared up at him with a silent plea, a look that pierced straight into his soul. Elias picked her up gently. Her body was cold. She trembled in his arms. He looked around for help, but no one was there. The town's loudspeakers echoed distant warnings about unauthorized alien objects, but he didn't care. Something deep inside him told him to protect this child. He wrapped her in his old jacket and rushed to the local clinic. The nurse examined her and shook her head. "She's disabled," the nurse whispered. "Her species usually abandons those like her. They don't survive long. You should report this to the authorities." Elias looked at the little girl. Her tiny hand gripped his finger weakly. It reminded him of another tiny hand he once held, his unborn child, who never made it into the world. The pain returned like a storm, but so did the warmth of love. "No," Elias said softly. "She's staying with me." The nurse hesitated, then gave him a few medical supplies. "If you take her, it's your responsibility. She'll need care." "A lot of care," Elias nodded. He didn't have wealth, power, or family, but he had determination. He named the child Leora, which meant light in the alien language. The days that followed were difficult. Leora's health was fragile. She couldn't walk, and her bones needed support. Elias worked extra hours cleaning warehouses, offices, and streets. Every night he returned home exhausted, but when he saw Leora smile weakly at him, the tiredness faded. Neighbors whispered behind his back, "Why is he keeping an alien? She's disabled, what's the point?" "He's inviting trouble." Elias ignored them all. He spent his nights repairing small medical devices from scrap, building braces to help her sit, creating toys to make her laugh. Slowly, her weak voice began to fill the small house. She called him Papa in her alien accent, and he laughed for the first time in years. As Leora grew, she faced cruel stares from both humans and aliens. At school, some children mocked her limp walk. Teachers avoided her because they didn't want to handle imperial complications, but Elias stood by her every step. He encouraged her to speak both languages. He fixed her braces when they broke. He held her when she cried. One evening, while Elias repaired a water pipe outside, he noticed a strange drone hovering near his house. It was not from the town's security. It was smooth, silent, and had the imperial crest faintly glowing on its side. It scanned the house for a moment, then flew away into the dark sky. A chill ran down his spine. "Who's looking for her?" he whispered. Leora, now 10 years old, often had dreams she couldn't explain. She described a palace with golden towers, a woman with glowing eyes, and a cold night with whispers. Elias dismissed it gently, thinking they were just nightmares. But deep inside, he felt something was not normal. One night, while he tucked her into bed, Leora asked quietly, "Papa, why do I look so different from everyone?" Elias paused. He stroked her alien ears softly. "Because you're special," he said. "Because you were meant to shine where others turned away." She smiled and held his hand tightly. That simple moment filled the room with warmth. But outside, beyond the stars, powerful forces had already begun searching. The lost royal child that the Empire once abandoned had survived, And soon, the truth would shake both worlds. For now, Elias didn't care about empires, thrones, or destiny. He only cared about the fragile girl sleeping peacefully beside him. He didn't know it yet, but the choice he made on that riverbank would lead to events that would change the galaxy forever. Shadows in the night. The night had grown colder than usual, and a silent wind moved through the narrow streets of the border town. Elias finished his late cleaning shift, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he walked back home through dimly lit alleys. Something felt different that night. The streets, usually filled with soft humming from drones and distant chatter, were strangely quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath. When he turned the corner toward his small house, he froze. A faint blue light shimmered on his wall, forming a grid pattern that slowly faded away as he approached. It was the same strange light he had seen from that imperial drone weeks ago. His heartbeat quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew panic would solve nothing. Inside the house, Leora sat near the window, her braces neatly placed beside her. She was reading one of the human storybooks Elias had found at the scrapyard. Her voice softly practiced the words in both languages, repeating each line with determination. When she saw him, she smiled, but Elias couldn't hide the worry on his face. She noticed instantly, because over the years she had learned to read every emotion in his eyes. "Papa, what's wrong?" she asked. He knelt beside her, looked out the window for a moment, and then gently closed the curtains. "Nothing, little light," he said. "Just lock the doors tonight." She tilted her head but obeyed without question. Later that night, while the town slept, Elias sat on the porch in silence. He didn't usually allow fear to take root in his heart, but something was moving in the shadows. His instincts, sharpened by years of quiet observation, told him they were being watched. Suddenly, his eyes caught movement near the corner of the street. 3 dark figures cloaked in black, moving slowly but with precision. They weren't drunk wanderers or night workers. Their steps were coordinated and their heads turned toward his house with mechanical discipline. Elias slowly reached for the heavy wrench he kept near the door, his mind already mapping escape routes. The figures reached the gate, and one of them pointed a small device toward the lock. A silent pulse of light flashed, and the metal latch clicked open without a sound. Elias held his breath. He waited until the first figure stepped onto his porch before he acted. With one powerful swing, he struck the railing, making a loud noise that startled them. The second figure rushed forward, but Elias was already moving. Years of working alone had taught him to use every tool like an extension of his hand. He slammed the door shut, locked it from inside, and pulled Leora close. "Hide in the storage space," he whispered firmly. Her eyes widened in fear, but she trusted him completely and crawled into the small compartment beneath the floorboards. The door shook violently as the intruders tried to break in. Elias pushed a heavy shelf against it and grabbed an old metal pipe from the corner. He wasn't a soldier, but his heart burned with the determination of a father. He would not let anyone take her. The first intruder managed to force the door open a crack, but Elias swung the pipe with all his strength, hitting the man's arm and knocking the device away. The second tried to climb through the window, but Elias had already set a trap, broken glass pieces glued to the frame. A scream echoed in the night as the intruder's hand sliced open. The third figure, smarter than the others, stayed back and spoke in a language Elias recognized as imperial dialect. The voice was cold, emotionless, and commanding. "Hand over the child, human. She does not belong to you." Elias's chest tightened. This was not a random attack. This was planned. He didn't answer. Instead, he shouted loudly in the human language for help. Neighbors turned on their lights. Sirens started ringing in the distance. The intruders, realizing their cover was blown, vanished into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only a faint smell of burned air and the cracked device on the ground. Elias locked the door again, lifted the floorboards, and pulled Leora out. She clung to him tightly, trembling but trying not to cry. "They were here for me, weren't they?" She whispered. He didn't lie. "Yes," he said, "but I won't let them take you. Ever." That night neither of them slept. Elias sat by the window, pipe in hand, watching the dark streets until sunrise. The next day, he went to the local security office to report the incident. but the officers looked uninterested. "Probably smugglers," one said lazily. "It happens." Elias tried to show them the device, but they brushed him off. Deep inside, he knew they were afraid. Nobody wanted to get involved with imperial affairs. Realizing he couldn't rely on others, Elias made a decision. He would find out the truth himself. He started investigating the drone he had seen earlier. He visited scrap dealers and underground tech experts, eventually finding a man who recognized the crest on the drone. "That's imperial scouting technology," the man whispered nervously. "They only use it to track high-value targets. If they're using that here, it means someone very important is hiding." That night, Leora had another dream. She saw herself standing in a palace of golden light. A tall woman with glowing eyes reached out to her, whispering in the alien tongue. Leora woke up sweating, her heart racing. She told Elias every detail. He listened carefully, his mind putting the pieces together. A lost royal heir, a strange pod, imperial scouts, hidden dreams. It all pointed toward something bigger than both of them. He walked to the window again and looked up at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, powerful forces were moving. And for the first time, Elias understood that their quiet life was about to collide with a storm far greater than he had ever imagined. The secret within morning sunlight crept slowly through the cracks of the curtains, but the warmth it carried did little to ease the cold weight that had settled inside Elias's heart. The attack from the previous night still replayed in his mind like a haunting echo. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the broken imperial device he had picked up from the ground. Its smooth metal surface glowed faintly, pulsing with blue light like a heartbeat. He didn't fully understand its technology, but one thing was clear. This was not common equipment. Whoever had sent those masked figures had resources, precision, and purpose. They weren't after a random child. They were after Leora. Leora sat quietly across from him, her usual bright expression dimmed by worry. She held her warm cup carefully between her thin fingers and watched him with the eyes of someone far older than her years. Over the last decade, she had grown from a fragile baby into a sharp and thoughtful child. She had learned to read emotions faster than books because every glance, every hesitation from Elias had taught her how to survive in a world where she was always different. She finally spoke in a soft voice. "Papa, why were they after me?" The question cut deep. Elias wanted to protect her innocence, but he also knew she was old enough to sense when truth was being hidden. He hesitated, then reached across the table and held her hand. "I don't know yet, little light," he said carefully, "but I will find out. And no matter what happens, I will keep you safe." After she left for school under the watch of their trusted neighbor, Elias made a decision he had avoided for years. He walked toward the restricted sector of the town where alien records and imperial archives were stored under tight surveillance. Most humans never entered that place. Its halls were cold, metallic, and unwelcoming. But Elias had worked in every part of the town over the years, and he knew back corridors, maintenance shafts, and forgotten service doors better than anyone else. He slipped through one of these hidden paths, avoiding security drones, and entered a dimly lit room stacked with data crystals and glowing tablets. Inside, the archives were silent except for the soft hum of machines. He approached a terminal and, with the cautious skill of a man who had learned by necessity, began searching through public incident records from a decade ago. Most files were locked behind imperial firewalls, but a few fragments were left unsecured. One headline froze his blood. "Imperial heir presumed dead in sabotage incident. Search abandoned." His hands trembled slightly as he opened the file. There it was. A grainy image of a royal cradle, floating in darkness, almost identical to the one he had found near the river years ago. The report explained how a powerful faction within the alien empire had tried to overthrow the Empress by targeting her newborn daughter. A desperate nurse had launched the child's pod into the night to save her, but the Empire had declared her lost. Officially, the heir was gone. Unofficially, it seemed someone never stopped looking. Elias leaned back slowly, his mind racing. He thought of the pod, the drones, the dreams Leora often described. Everything was starting to connect like puzzle pieces forming a dangerous picture. But he also knew that this truth was a blade that cut both ways. If the Empire discovered that Leora was alive, she could be claimed as theirs and taken away forever. That was something he could not allow. As he left the archives, he didn't notice the small spherical drone silently tracking his movement from the shadows above. Later that evening, as the sky turned crimson, Leora returned home tired. She had been quiet all day at school, sensing that something was changing. Children had whispered after hearing rumors of the attack. Some of them were afraid of her now. A few teachers avoided eye contact as if associating with her would bring trouble. She entered the house, dropped her school bag, and looked at Elias with serious eyes. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. He tried to deflect, but her gaze was unshakable. "Please," she said softly, "I need to know." Elias sat her down and explained everything he had discovered in the simplest way possible. He told her about the Imperial report, the lost heir, and the pod. He did not say she was definitely the heir, but the implications were clear. Leora listened without interrupting. When he finished, silence filled the room. She finally whispered, "So I was never meant to stay here. I was someone else before I was me." Elias's chest ached at her words. He reached out, placed his hands on her shoulders, and said, "You are my daughter. That is the only truth that matters to me." But outside, events were already shifting. The imperial noble who had secretly arrived in the town, Lord Vethrin, a cunning figure from the Empress's court, stood on a balcony in the alien district, watching Elias's home through a magnified lens. He had received reports from his spies. A disabled alien girl living with a human janitor. Strange imperial technology detected nearby. Unusual resistance during a midnight operation. Vethran's thin lips curved into a cold smile. "After all these years," he murmured, "the lost flame flickers again." 2 days later, a formal letter arrived from the alien administration, inviting Leora to a special medical program for gifted children in the capital. It looked official, with seals and signatures, but Elias's instincts screamed that it was a trap. He burned the letter in the fireplace that night without telling Leora. But the invitation wasn't just a request. It was a signal that they now knew where she was. The walls around their quiet life were beginning to close in, and Elias understood that the secret he had uncovered was not something they could keep hidden forever. As Leora slept that night, troubled by visions of golden halls and whispering voices, Elias sat alone under the stars. His mind was heavy, but his resolve had never been stronger. The truth was out there now, and soon powerful hands would try to claim her. But he made a silent promise to himself as he looked at her sleeping form. No matter who came, he would not let them take away the child he had raised as his own. The imperial trap. The days that followed were unusually calm, but Elias could feel the tension tightening around their lives like an invisible net. The streets of the border town looked the same. The neighbors went about their daily routines, and the air carried the same dry scent of dust and oil. But beneath that quiet surface, something had shifted. Strange figures appeared more often in the marketplace, asking seemingly harmless questions about families with alien children. Drones hovered longer in the night sky. Official patrols passed by Elias's house more frequently than ever before. It was the kind of silence that always comes before a storm. Elias had lived long enough to recognize it. One late afternoon, while Leora was helping Elias clean out old tools in the shed, a sleek black vehicle arrived outside their small home. Its surface gleamed under the setting sun, displaying the subtle insignia of the Imperial Integration Department, an agency that was supposed to promote cooperation between humans and aliens, but was rumored to act as a quiet arm of the Empire's intelligence. 2 well-dressed alien officials stepped out. Their movements were precise, their expressions carefully neutral. Leora froze for a moment, a flicker of something ancient stirring inside her, as if her blood recognized the scent of power. Elias stepped protectively in front of her as they approached. "Mr. Elias," one of them said smoothly, his voice carrying the artificial politeness of someone used to giving orders. "We have received reports about a gifted child in your care. The Empire is pleased to offer her a full scholarship to attend a prestigious interspecies academy in the capital. All expenses covered, of course. She will receive medical care, education, and opportunities your world cannot provide." His words were honey, but his eyes were ice. Elias forced a smile, thanked them, and told them they would consider it. The officials left behind a polished black card, the imperial crest glowing faintly on its surface. As their vehicle disappeared into the distance, Elias crushed the card in his hand. He knew this was not generosity. This was bait. That night he and Leora sat by the fire. She stared at the flames silently, sensing his unease. "They want me to leave," she said softly. Elias looked at her, torn between fear and love. "They want to take you," he corrected gently. "They will make it sound like a gift, but their hands are never empty. Once you step into their world, they will decide who you are. Not you." Leora stayed quiet, but her mind raced. For years, she had lived as a quiet outsider, a child who didn't belong fully to either world. Now, suddenly, the world that had abandoned her was calling her back. She didn't know whether to feel fear, curiosity, or anger. A week later, the trap was set. The Imperial Department announced a special medical and academic program for exceptional alien youths with unique conditions. The entire town was buzzing. Teachers encouraged parents to apply, politicians gave speeches about unity, and media drones hovered above the streets, broadcasting the Empire's generosity. Leora's name was mentioned indirectly in every conversation. The girl with braces. The alien child raised by the janitor. She should go. It's her chance. Elias could see the Empire's strategy clearly. They weren't forcing her. They were making the community pressure them instead. If he resisted, he would look like the one holding her back. It was brilliant manipulation. Elias tried to refuse quietly, but the pressure grew. One night, a group of neighbors came to his door, smiling nervously. "Elias, maybe you should let her go," one said. "This is bigger than you. She could have a future." Another added, "The Empire is watching. It wouldn't be wise to anger them." Even the local security officer came by, subtly reminding Elias that resistance might bring unnecessary attention. He realized then that they were pushing him into a corner with soft words and polite threats. Leora, meanwhile, struggled internally. She trusted Elias completely, but deep inside, the dreams of the Golden Palace had grown stronger. Every night she saw visions of halls made of light, voices whispering her name, and a woman with glowing eyes reaching out to her. She didn't fully understand these dreams, but they felt like pieces of a puzzle calling her home. She told Elias about them, and though his heart ached, he knew he couldn't hide the truth forever. She needed answers, even if those answers led into dangerous territory. Eventually, under immense pressure and fearing that outright refusal would draw violent retaliation, Elias agreed to let Leora participate in the program's orientation trip. His plan was to accompany her, observe everything, and pull her out at the first sign of danger. He didn't trust them, but he also understood that hiding forever would only make things worse. On the morning of the departure, the black Imperial transport arrived. Officials greeted them with flawless courtesy, but Elias noticed the military-grade cloaking nodes attached beneath the vehicle. This was no simple school bus. It was a silent prison on wheels. As the transport moved toward the capital, Elias kept his eyes sharp. The countryside turned to metallic highways, and the horizon was soon dominated by the Imperial City, a massive structure of towers piercing the clouds, wrapped in glowing shields and orbiting defense rings. It was both beautiful and intimidating, like a golden cage. When they arrived at the orientation center, everything seemed perfect. Smiling instructors, shining halls, advanced technology. But Elias's instincts screamed that everything was staged. Hidden cameras watched every corner. Guards in plain clothes monitored their steps. The officials spoke with rehearsed precision, their smiles never reaching their eyes. At night, when Leora was shown to her room, Elias snuck into restricted areas through maintenance tunnels, using his knowledge as a janitor to navigate unseen. What he found chilled him. Behind the shining academy walls was a direct transport corridor leading to the Imperial Palace itself. The program wasn't just education, it was a delivery system. Leora was never meant to study here. She was meant to be brought home to where her bloodline belonged. And now, Elias realized with growing dread, they were already deep inside the Empire's grasp. The air revealed. The imperial city rose like a shining spear of gold and steel, piercing the clouds with its endless towers. Ships moved across the sky in perfect formation, guarded by invisible energy fields and patrol squadrons that never rested. Elias had seen cities before, but nothing compared to this. It was a place built to display power, not just hold it. Every structure, every road, every gate was designed to remind anyone who entered that they stood beneath something greater. For Elias, it wasn't awe he felt as they arrived. It was a tightening in his chest, a sense of walking into a lion's den while pretending to be unafraid. Leora walked beside him silently, her steps careful with the help of her braces. She looked up at the glowing palace towers with wide eyes. It was strange. Part of her felt like a stranger here, but deep inside there was a flicker of recognition. The air smelled familiar. The rhythm of the guard's march sounded like a lullaby she couldn't fully remember. Whispers in a language she had once heard in dreams echoed faintly through the palace walls. Something in her blood was responding to this place, awakening memories she didn't know she carried. She didn't speak of it, but Elias noticed the distant look in her eyes and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay close to me," he whispered. She nodded. The orientation program lasted 2 days, but it was nothing more than a carefully crafted performance. Smiling officials spoke about opportunity, unity, and a brighter future, but their eyes tracked Leora with unusual focus. The instructor's attention lingered longer on her than on any other child. On the second day, a sudden announcement spread through the facility. A royal cultural event was to be held at the palace, and all participants were invited. Elias knew instantly this was the moment everything had been leading toward. They weren't here to educate her. They were here to confirm her identity. The palace was a masterpiece of alien architecture. Golden walls lined with living vines that glowed softly, stairways carved from crystals, and ceilings painted with scenes of Empress's past. Massive crowds filled the ceremonial hall, nobles dressed in rich fabrics and adorned with shimmering insignias. At the center stood a raised platform where the Empress herself would soon appear. Guards took strict positions, their disciplined movements like a perfectly synchronized machine. Elias and Leora stood among the guests, blending in as much as they could, but he could feel eyes on them. He had no weapons, no allies, only his sharp mind and his love for the girl standing beside him. When the Empress entered, the hall fell into absolute silence. She was tall and radiant, her eyes glowing faintly with power, her presence commanding without effort. Her gown shimmered like starlight, and her expression was calm but cold, the look of someone who carried the weight of galaxies on her shoulders. As she took her place on the throne, a group of officials stepped forward and began calling selected children to the stage for cultural blessings. One by one, children stepped forward, received a formal touch from a priest, and returned to their place. Then, suddenly, Leora's name was called. Elias froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to stop her, to grab her hand and run, but dozens of guards were watching. Leora looked at him. Her eyes were frightened, but somewhere in that fear there was also courage. Elias nodded slowly. "I'm here," he whispered. With trembling steps, she climbed onto the stage. Every noble's gaze locked onto her small figure as the priest approached with a scanning scepter. It wasn't part of the usual ceremony. It was something more. The device hummed as it passed over her, reading biological markers hidden deep within her cells. A moment later, the hall was filled with a sharp, rising tone. The scepter's lights shifted to a deep royal gold, glowing so brightly that even the nobles gasped. The priest's hands shook. He turned to the throne and shouted in the imperial language, his voice echoing across the hall. The Empress rose slowly, her expression unreadable. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd like a storm. The lost heir. It cannot be. She was dead. Look at her markings. Leora stood frozen in the center, surrounded by strangers as her identity, hidden for 10 years, was suddenly laid bare before the entire empire. The Empress descended from the throne and approached her. The crowd bowed deeply as she walked, her gown trailing like a river of light. She stopped in front of Leora, staring at her face with a piercing gaze. Leora felt something stir inside her again, a memory of a warm embrace, a woman singing softly, and then darkness and fear. Tears welled in her eyes without her fully understanding why. The Empress raised a hand slowly, as if touching something fragile, and placed it against Leora's cheek. "It's you," she whispered in her own language, barely audible, but the hall seemed to freeze at those words. Nobles began to argue among themselves. Some bowed even lower, whispering pledges of loyalty to the rightful heir. Others protested loudly, calling her imperfect because of her disability and her years among humans. A few demanded proof beyond doubt, while others saw opportunity in supporting her. The court was split in seconds, old rivalries igniting like dry wood catching fire. Elias watched from below, his hands clenched. He saw the way some looked at her with reverence, but others with greed and hatred. He understood then that her identity wasn't just a truth, it was a weapon that different factions would try to control. Guards moved to escort Leora toward the Empress's private chambers, but Elias pushed through the crowd. He couldn't let them take her away without a word. He shouted her name, and her head turned sharply, eyes locking on him through the sea of nobles. "Papa!" she cried out instinctively. The word echoed through the ceremonial hall, shocking everyone. Nobles whispered in disbelief. The heir calling a human janitor father? The Empress's expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of something human breaking through her royal mask. Guards blocked Elias's path, but he refused to step back. Even in the presence of an empire, his eyes held firm. In that moment, the Empress understood there was a story she didn't know, and the entire court realized that the lost heir was not just returning. She was returning with a father who defied them all. A father's stand. The ceremonial hall remained frozen in stunned silence after Leora's cry echoed across the palace. Her voice carried more power than any royal decree. "Papa!" she had shouted, not father, not guardian, but a word filled with warmth and belonging that crossed species, politics, and bloodlines. The nobles stared in disbelief. The Empress stood still, her glowing eyes flickering with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The guards hesitated for a brief moment, unsure whether to drag the human away or bow before the heir. It was in that hesitation that Elias made his move. He pushed forward through the crowd with the quiet strength of a man who had spent his entire life being overlooked, underestimated, and ignored. His clothes were simple, his hands rough from years of labor, but his presence in that moment commanded the attention of an empire. He didn't care about the polished marble beneath his boots, the towering banners above, or the thousands of eyes watching. All he saw was his daughter, frightened, confused, and being slowly pulled away from the life they had built together. As the guards moved to block him again, Elias's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "I'm not leaving her," he said firmly. The words were not shouted. They were spoken with such quiet certainty that even the soldiers paused. The Empress raised her hand slightly, signaling the guards to stop. She stepped down from the platform and studied him closely. Her gaze was powerful, almost overwhelming, but Elias didn't flinch. In those glowing eyes, he saw both the ruler of a vast empire and the mother of a child who had once been lost. She approached him slowly, the hall parting around her like water around a ship. When she stood a few feet away, she spoke in a calm but commanding voice. "Who are you to stand before my throne and claim the heir of the empire as yours?" Her voice echoed, carrying both accusation and curiosity. Elias met her gaze without bowing. "I am the one who found her when your empire threw her away," he said. "I am the one who held her when she couldn't walk, who stayed up at night to ease her pain, who taught her words, songs, and laughter. I am the one who raised her when no one else would." His voice grew stronger with every sentence, not out of arrogance but out of truth. "You abandoned a child because she didn't fit your perfect image. I saw a little girl who needed love, not power. I am her father." The words struck the court like a thunderclap. Nobles gasped, some in outrage, others in awe. Murmurs filled the hall like a rising storm. The Empress's expression shifted subtly. For the first time, the perfect mask cracked. Her eyes softened for a heartbeat before hardening again. She gestured for the court to be silent. "You speak boldly for a human," she said. "Do you not fear what this means? By standing here, you place yourself against centuries of imperial law." Elias took a slow breath. "I've cleaned your streets. I've fixed your broken systems. I've lived beneath your laws my entire life. But this is my daughter. There's nothing you can threaten me with that matters more than her." The tension in the hall reached a breaking point. Several nobles began shouting objections, demanding Elias be removed immediately. "He's a human, an outsider. This is an insult to the throne. The heir cannot be tainted by such bonds." Others, however, whispered among themselves, impressed by his courage. Some lower-ranking citizens in the crowd, workers and attendants, looked at him with silent pride. For the first time, they saw someone like them stand in the heart of power without bowing. Suddenly, a group of royal advisors stepped forward, their ornate robes swaying. They surrounded the Empress and began speaking urgently in her ear. Their words carried the heavy weight of politics. One advisor, his face sharp and calculating, pointed at Elias and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Your Majesty, this human is a threat to the Empire's image. If the heir is to be accepted, he must be erased from her story. Remove him quietly and the people will forget." Leora's eyes widened in terror. "No!" she shouted, struggling against the guards holding her at the edge of the platform. Her voice cracked, filled with pain and desperation. "He's my father. He's the only one who never gave up on me." Elias saw her struggle, and something inside him burned brighter than fear. He took a step forward, ignoring the sharp spears pointed at his chest. "You talk about image, power, and bloodlines," he said, his voice rising now, strong and clear. "But she is more than your throne. She is kind, brave, and alive, because humanity gave her what your empire denied: love without conditions. If this empire cannot accept that, then it is weaker than I thought." The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Her advisors waited, the court held its breath, and even the soldiers didn't move. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke not to her court, but to the palace's recording systems, which transmitted her words live across the empire. "The human stands here claiming a bond of the heart stronger than blood. Let the people judge." Screens across the empire lit up, broadcasting the scene. Billions watched as a simple janitor stood before the Empress, unbroken. Messages began flooding in from across star systems. Workers, soldiers, and citizens, both human and alien, sent support for Elias and Leora. Old wounds between species began to shift as ordinary people saw not politics but something pure, a father standing for his daughter. Some nobles grew nervous, realizing public opinion was turning. The advisors whispered urgently again, but the Empress was no longer listening to them. She stepped closer to Elias and studied his face again. "You have defied fear," she said softly, almost to herself. "Few have ever done that in my presence." Elias simply replied, "I wasn't here to defy you. I was here to protect her." The Empress turned her gaze toward Leora, who stood trembling but proud, her heart torn between two worlds. The moment was no longer just a confrontation between a human and an empire. It was a turning point for an entire galaxy. The return of the heir. The imperial throne room stood silent, but it was no longer the silence of control. It was the heavy electric silence that comes before a world changes forever. Billions watched through the Empire's broadcast systems as the Empress stood before a human janitor who had refused to kneel, and a girl who was both the Empire's lost heir and a living bridge between two worlds. In the stillness, every noble, every advisor, every soldier and worker held their breath, waiting for the Empress's next words. What she decided in that moment would shape not only her court, but the fate of countless worlds. The Empress turned slowly toward the sea of nobles who had begun to murmur again, their polished composure cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Her eyes glowed brighter, and her voice rose with a clarity that cut through every whisper. For 10 years, this empire believed its heir was dead. For 10 years, a child born to the royal line was abandoned by those who should have protected her. And for 10 years, while we turned away, a human, not a noble, not a warrior, not a council member, gave her what we would not. Her gaze swept across the hall, landing on those who had called Leora imperfect, forcing them to look into the truth they had tried to bury. She extended her hand toward Leora, beckoning her forward. Leora walked with measured steps, her braces clinking softly against the polished floor. Every eye followed her, some with awe, some with bitterness, and some with fear. She stood beside the Empress, small yet unshakable. The Empress placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and for the first time her voice softened. "She is my blood, yes. But more than that, she is proof that love can thrive where pride has failed. She carries within her the strength of two worlds." The crowd stirred uneasily, unsure how to react to an Empress who spoke not of conquest, but of unity. Then she turned toward Elias, who stood still, exhausted but unwavering. "You have done what my empire could not," she said. "You gave life where we saw only weakness. You gave hope where we offered none. You taught the heir of the empire compassion and courage." Her words echoed across the galaxy, carried by the broadcast. For the first time, billions of citizens saw their ruler not as a distant figure wrapped in gold and power, but as someone capable of acknowledging a human's role in shaping their future. Elias didn't bow. He simply nodded once, his expression humble but firm. In that simple gesture, he represented something larger than himself, the quiet, unbreakable spirit of humanity. The court erupted into chaos. Some nobles shouted in outrage, demanding tradition be upheld and Elias removed. Others saw opportunity in this shift, pledging their loyalty to the heir and her unusual father. Advisors tried to persuade the Empress to silence the public feed, to control the message before it spread too far. But it was too late. Across star systems, ordinary people, alien and human alike, cheered. Messages flooded in, calling Leora, the light returned, and Elias, the father of the heir. What began as whispers became a tidal wave of support. The empire, for the first time in generations, was not united by fear, but by a story that touched hearts. The Empress raised her hands, commanding silence once more. "From this day forward," she declared, "Leora, daughter of two worlds, shall be recognized as the rightful heir of the empire. Her differences will not be hidden. They will be honored. Her journey will not be erased. It will be remembered." Her voice grew stronger with each sentence, shaking the foundations of centuries-old traditions. "And the human who raised her, Elias, shall not be forgotten or discarded. He shall stand beside her, not as a noble or a servant, but as the father who gave this empire back its heart." The hall gasped. Nobles had expected her to tolerate Elias, not elevate him. Leora's eyes filled with tears as she turned toward Elias. For years, she had feared that her origins would tear them apart. Instead, they stood together before an empire, their bond stronger than ever. She stepped forward, and in front of the Empress, the nobles, and the galaxy itself, she took Elias's hand. The hall's massive ceiling opened, revealing the night sky filled with countless ships. One by one, those ships dimmed their lights, bowing in the traditional sign of respect for the ascendant heir. The moment was breathtaking. An entire galaxy kneeling not out of fear, but out of reverence for a story that defied everything they had believed. As the crowd roared and history shifted, Elias stood still, overwhelmed by the scale of it all. He had never dreamed of palaces, power, or glory. He had only ever wanted to keep a broken child safe. Yet here he was, standing in the center of an empire, holding the hand of the girl he had raised, watching the stars bow before her. Leora looked at him through tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Papa, we did it." He smiled, not the proud smile of a man who had conquered, but the quiet smile of a father who had simply kept his promise. In the days that followed, changes rippled through the empire. Policies began to shift toward inclusion and compassion. Human communities that had lived on the fringes found new recognition. Nobles who had mocked Elias now studied his speeches and actions carefully. Leora began her formal training as heir, but she never abandoned the lessons Elias had taught her in their small home: kindness, resilience, and humility. She carried those values into the royal court, slowly reshaping it from the inside. The Empress, who had once ruled with distance, found herself learning from the very human she had almost dismissed. Elias chose to remain who he was. He refused noble titles and grand estates, preferring to live quietly within the palace grounds where he could watch over Leora as he always had. At night, he often stood on the palace balcony, looking out at the same stars he once gazed upon from their modest border town. The world had changed, but his love for her remained the same: steady, unconditional, and eternal. The galaxy would remember emperors, wars, and councils, but above all, it would remember the human janitor who adopted a broken alien child and stood against an empire.